Welcome to the Lend Academy podcast, session number 16. This is your host, Peter Renton, founder of Lend Academy. We have a fascinating guest on the show today. We have Charles Moldow, who is a partner at Foundation Capital. They are a Silicon Valley venture capital firm that has made several investments in this space, most notable of which was their investment last year alongside Google into Lending Club. So Charles has produced a white paper recently, which if you haven't read it yet, I strongly suggest you do. It's one of the best papers I've ever put together in this industry. There will be a link in the show notes to that paper. And he actually gave a presentation about it at Lend It recently, which I thought was also fascinating. So I wanted to get him on the podcast to really go into a little bit more depth with this white paper and just really get his perspectives on the industry. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, Charles.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, so let's just get started with giving the listeners a little bit of background about yourself, what your career path has been, how you ended up at a Silicon Valley VC.
Sure. I was a finance guy by trade coming out of Wharton undergrad, and I went to Wall Street. And didn't like the transactional nature of Wall Street, but obviously did like finance. And started a small business in the publishing space and then went back to business school. And after business school in 93, we were starting to see the convergence of kind of communications and technology and media, and that really caught my eye. And the place where a lot of that innovation was happening was in the cable industry. And so I went and worked at the largest cable company in the country at the time called Telecommunications Inc., or TCI, run by John Malone. And there I got the opportunity to start a little venture group where we were investing in next generation technologies. And that put me out in Silicon Valley. And in 95, I worked with TCI to start a company called At Home Network, where we were bringing high-speed internet access through the cable infrastructure. That was my first real entrepreneurial experience and helped build that company over 5 years, took it public, and then moved on from there to help start another company called Tell Me Networks, which was in kind of a next-generation voice recognition space. And we ended up 5 years later selling that to Microsoft for nearly $1 billion. And after that run of about 12 years, I was pretty fatigued and had enjoyed the entrepreneurial experience, but really wanted to get back on the investor side of things. And so in 2005, joined Foundation Capital as a general partner, and I've been with Foundation ever since. And really here, my main focus has been in the consumer sector, consumer internet, mobile, advertising technologies, and consumer financial services fits within that domain. And it's one of the areas that's been reasonably ignored, but I find fascinating, and there's a lot of disruption going on, obviously. And the firm had two very successful investments in the space. One was called Financial Engines, and the other was called InvestNet, which both went public. And so I wanted to kind of parlay the reputation of the firm in the area and see if I could do more with that. And that led to first the investment in Lending Club, and then a payments company called BankBox, and then Motif Investing on the wealth management side, and then more recently On Deck, Lending Home, and Aux Money as well.
Okay.
So we have now a robust capability in the consumer financial services investing space.
Sure. So when did Lending Club and the whole peer-to-peer lending space get on your radar, and how did it get on your radar?
Yep. I first read about it in 2008, so I was kind of maybe a year behind the starting of it. And I think the first time I read about it was when I heard about the Virgin brand leaving the space because they came to the U.S. to try to extend their brand, and it didn't really work. But I was fascinated with the concept, read about Prosper, didn't like what I had read about it because there was a lot of dissatisfaction, heard about Lending Club, put some money on the platform, and was so fascinated I reached out through a co-board member that I knew and met Renaud and had lunch with him. And fascinating guy, was very impressed with his vision. This was now in 2009. And after I think our second or third meeting, he said to me, we need to raise some money. Would you like to take a look? And I did at the time, and I loved what I saw. The business seemed very impressive to me. It was growing nicely. Obviously, it had its challenges in matching the supply and demand on the marketplace. But ironically, I decided to pass, and I actually passed on the investment.
And what year was that?
And my this was 2009. This was the fall of 2009.
Okay.
And my main concern, interestingly, and I've talked to Renaud about this a number of times, my main concern was not anything to do with Lending Club, but the class action lawsuit for Prosper had been filed some number of months before, and it felt to me like there was a big risk that could take the whole industry down, and that while Lending Club was taking a better approach with the SEC and trying to do everything the right way, nonetheless, a very ugly tens of millions of dollar class action lawsuit could spoil the opportunity for future venture dollars and for investors to be interested. And I just thought there was a bit of catastrophic risk at the time associated with the phenomenon. And so I passed.
Mm-hmm.
And then just 8 months later, Renaud called me up again and said, "Hey, we're raising another round. Would you be interested in taking another look?" And at that point in time, Renaud had come out of the SEC process. The lawsuit at Prosper had kind of faded away a little bit and had not taken the company down. And it felt like a better time to invest. And that was the time when I decided to jump in.
Right. Okay. So then you made a small investment, and then we all heard about your round last year, just over 12 months ago, where you were in the round that Google came in on. So you obviously that was a pretty large investment from what I read. So you obviously decided to more than double down. It seems like you sort of put a pretty big bet on the table last year. So what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, it certainly was an unusual move for an early stage venture capital to make, and that's probably why it was so notable in the press. Because here we are, an early stage venture firm. Why are we leading around at $1.5 billion valuation?
Right.
That kind of caught some people's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality was, we had been investing after the round that we did all along the way, but we had not been able to put as much money to work as we were interested, given how excited we were about the idea. And we had an opportunity to buy an outsized chunk. And for us, the thesis was very clear. Here it is, we're investing in a company that at the time was on the verge of being cash flow break even, so there was no risk to the business model. We knew the management team and thought they were incredibly capable. The credit and underwriting history existed. We knew that lender capital was plentiful. We knew the borrower acquisition costs were under control. And then finally, we felt like there was a massive market. And so that we believed that the opportunity size was multiples of the price we were coming in at. And so we said to ourselves, as venture investors, when we invest in companies and hope that we can make 10x on our money, we're taking in tremendous risk. We're taking management team risk and business model risk and product market fit risk. And here we are, we know all those things, and we think there's still a 10x opportunity. Why would we not invest a lot of money right now in Lending Club? And the answer was, you couldn't come up with a reason why you wouldn't do it.
Right.
And obviously we leaned forward and we're excited to do it.
Yeah. Now you're here sitting 13 months later, and you're already well on your way to your 10x return.
Yeah. Yeah. We feel very good, obviously.
Right. Okay. So then just wanted to talk a little bit about, the other investments you've made. You say you're an early stage firm. You mentioned Ox Money, Lending Home, and what was the other one that you mentioned?
On Deck.
On Deck, of course.
Yeah, On Deck.
Yes. I'm actually having Noah on the show next week. So just what are you looking for? How does a firm get on your radar screen?
We put them on our radar screen. So the advantage of being deep vertically in a space, in addition to having most companies being aware of you, is that we're aware of them.
Right.
And so we do an aggressive outreach to make sure that we know what's going on across all the verticals, which also means wanting to know when and how they're thinking about the next round of funding. And so we'd like to believe that we're seeing most everything that's getting funded in the space and trying to figure out which ones make sense for us to invest in. Mm-hmm. And that was certainly the case with On Deck.
Right. Okay, so then I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the white paper that you released here a short time ago. It was it's obviously been a lot of buzz was created around this white paper, particularly at Lendit with your presentation talking about it. So what I want to talk about first is why did you decide to create it?
I felt like I had tremendous excitement for this industry, and that there are a small number of influential people and companies that shared the point of view, but that it felt to me like too well kept a secret. I'm seeing excitement around, mobile apps and messaging apps and game companies. And I'm thinking to myself, the companies that are getting started in this space are going to be as large or larger than all of these other companies. And yet I'm not hearing anybody talk about it.
Right.
And it was a little bit of just frustration, feeling like these companies deserved to be heard. And the reason that they weren't being heard is that nobody was explaining to the community, the investment community, the press, why anybody should care. And the reason people care is because it's going to be a really big opportunity. And so it felt to me like somebody needed to step forward and say, hey, world, like this is a very big deal and you're not getting it. And let me tell you why. And that was really what motivated me to want to do it.
Okay. And it's obviously it's been very well received so far. What in that report you introduce a new term, and it's actually getting a little attraction. I mean, I was in New York last week and I went to a marketplace lending meetup. So now that there's clearly some people that are embracing the term, did you? And I talked with Renaud about this, and he said this was something that you came up with. And yep. What was your thought? Now, can you just explain how you came up with the term, and what was it? Just something that popped into your head, or did you really decide that you wanted to create a new term for this industry?
Well, I'm going to give a little credit to Renaud, and I'll tell you why. But really, the motivation for me was that I felt like in wanting to tell the world that there was a big opportunity that people were missing, one of the things that was handicapping the opportunity was this peer-to-peer label.
Right.
It's a cottage industry label. It makes it sound very unprofessional, very casual, not very structured, and certainly not something that fit the need for the industry to be thought of as a legitimate and new asset class. Mm-hmm. And peer-to-peer is just not going to be an asset class that, pension funds and mutual funds want to invest in and want to put their customers into. But a new term could certainly indicate that. And we thought about alternative asset lending, and we thought about alternative bank lending. We threw out a bunch of terms. And the reason why I ultimately landed on marketplace lending was because for so many years I had been listening to Renaud argue with the financial community that he was not a specialty finance company, but that he was a marketplace. And that marketplaces have some unique advantages to them, and ultimately those benefits show up in the business model and in performance of companies that are true marketplaces. Mm-hmm. And that while alternative asset kind of might indicate some of what this is, the real magic for those that can achieve it is to create robust two-sided marketplaces. And I felt like that was the aspiration. That is the aspiration that most of the companies I speak to want to achieve. And so to me, it felt like a really appropriate term because it to some degree implied a little bit of Silicon Valley magic. Uber's a marketplace, Airbnb's a marketplace, mm-hmm. eBay was the very first large marketplace. So it had a bit of Silicon Valley to it, but it felt like it had a bit of structure to it as well. And it felt like it was deserving of being thought of as an asset class. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's why I put the stake in the ground on, let's see if we can change this movement to become marketplace lending.
Yeah, and I think it's really going to get traction. I mean, people obviously are still calling it peer-to-peer lending because that's just been the name it's always been known as. But I see more and more uses of the term marketplace lending over the last month. So I think it's been well received. So on your white paper, you title it "A $1 trillion market by the people for the people," and then in your paper you say that this you make a prediction basically that you think this is going to be a $1 trillion market by 2025, which we're 10 and a half years away right now. So I guess why make that prediction, and can you how did you come to that number?
Yeah, so there are two pieces to that. One is why put out a number, right? And the second is what should the number be? Mm-hmm. And I think the why part of it was the more interesting piece, which was why bother at all making a prediction? And I made the prediction very specifically because, well, for a few reasons. One, I wanted to catalyze the industry around something that felt both achievable and significant. Two, I wanted the outside world, the people outside of the community, to wake up and realize the size, the magnitude of the opportunity. And three, I knew that if I came up with something, some prediction, it would be the thing that would possibly be referenced most often, and therefore it would be reinforcing the thesis. Just so the press is, in reality, the press loves to grab a hold of catchy phrases, and I wanted to try to find something that could represent the industry well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, kind of the amount of underwriting, the amount of loans issued, obviously could have been a key metric. You could have done the number of borrowers. We looked at the number. We looked at the amount of interest expense saved by consumers and applied it to GDP. That was another way we started to look at it. We thought it could save 3% of all GDP, but that was a little bit finance geeky,
mm-hmm.
And so we came back. So I came back to originations, and so then the second piece was, okay, what should the number be? And it's got to be something round. It can't be some 7 decimal point number, obviously.
Sure.
And when I looked at it, the market for the cumulative market for the products we talk about globally is somewhere in the north of $6 trillion today. And if we compound the growth in that at a reasonable number, it felt like that could be 10 trillion to north of 10 trillion. And then it came down to what is the penetration that we think all of these platforms collectively can achieve. And obviously the number we came up with was 10%, which gets us our trillion. I will tell you that the projections that we looked at had it north of $1 trillion.
Right.
And I backed it down to $1 trillion for a few more practical reasons.
Sure. When if you look, doubling every year over 10 years is 1,000 times, and you're looking at something that's sort of a little bit over 100 times, or not even actually over a 10-year period. So I could see how we may overachieve your number. It'll be certainly interesting to see how it pans out. So, your white paper is full of just great little nuggets, and I could spend the next 3 hours discussing it. But one I just wanted to touch on here is something that was also talked about by Cormac Leach in his report that came out a couple of months ago in the UK, and that is about the efficiency of banks. And you said that 70% of the top 500 banks globally have not achieved increased cost efficiency over the past 5 years. That's staggering to me in the productivity increases over 5 years, and that 70% of the top 500 banks can't get any. So why do you think that is? I think it's a result of old and inflexible technical infrastructure, complex human processes, regulation, an aging fixed asset base, and the challenges that security poses for these companies. Mm-hmm. When you add up all of those worries and headaches, they got a lot on their plate. And unfortunately for them, they can't spend a lot of their R&D dollars and a lot of their management time re-engineering technology and processes to achieve efficiency. So you basically expect that there won't be anything. You're looking out another 5 years. There won't. You think that number will probably still stay about the same. That most of them won't be able to achieve increased cost efficiency. Yeah, no, it's getting worse, not better. The other thing is, of course, the assemblage of the mega bank and all of the distinct platforms that they've had to bring together and merge and manage has become so unwieldy that the largest banks are probably in worse shape than all the medium-sized banks who are getting their infrastructure from third-party outsourcers in some cases. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right, sure. So digging a little bit deeper into your white paper, you came up with these 4 maxims, and these are maxims for success really in this industry for the platforms. And I just want to go through each one really quickly here. And the first maxim you talk about, you say data, data, data. So what do you mean by, like, data is obviously important. That how important is the data sources and the underwriting expertise for these, for new platforms? You've made it your first maxim, so I take it you feel this is one of the things you consider most important. Is that correct?
Well, certainly, if it goes wrong, it's the most important. Right?
Right.
Bad credit means the end of a business. So it can't go wrong. It doesn't mean that it has to go the most right. So, for example, great use of data, but without liquidity in your marketplace also doesn't get you anywhere. So, all the factors are important. My point was simply that there's an opportunity to take advantage of all these new data sources. And that opportunity, ultimately, if people seize it, will show up in either better loan performance and or lower yields for borrowers, which then obviously reduces borrower acquisition costs, which creates this very virtuous cycle. And so taking advantage of what's sitting out there, utilizing technology to access all these data sources and figuring out how they should blend into a credit model, to me, is really important. And we meet firms on two ends of the spectrum and in the middle. On the one end, we meet firms that are a little bit old school and a little bit blind to it, and we just don't consider investing in those companies at all. It makes no sense. The other extreme, we meet companies that almost think that that's going to be their differentiator, and they're force-fitting the concept of big data into underwriting. And if the data isn't correlated to performance, then who cares about the data? You shouldn't force fit it. And then there are companies that I would say are more in the middle that are smartly utilizing data, figuring out where the correlations exist and how to improve performance, and using robust next generation platforms to sort through a lot of this data to input as inputs to their credit models. And I think that's great.
Okay, great. So then so maximum number 2 is about connections and liquidity, and you say it's not just about matchmaking, which we all know about the matches between investors and borrowers, but you say it's also about market making. Can you explain what you mean by market making?
Sure. So obviously we talked about the importance of the marketplace label, and you have to have both sides of an equation to be a market maker. And we know that the borrower side of the equation will always exist. There will always be demand for capital. And really only the question is, 1, do borrowers know you exist? And 2, are your rates competitive? That's reasonably straightforward. The lender side of the equation is much more fickle because money is fungible and can move pretty easily. And so if your product is interesting, money will find its way to it. And if your product is uninteresting, money will leave it just as quickly. And so if money's coming onto your platform and leaving your platform, think of it quickly, think of it as fast money, then you have a really hard time managing liquidity in your marketplace, which is why in the paper I say, look, there's money is not just money. There's all different types of money. And the thing you want to think about as a CEO managing a platform is the stickiness of the money to the platform for liquidity. You want to know that there's always going to be money there for your borrowers. And to me, the different sources have different values of stickiness. And I think there was a chart that made it into the paper that kind of, to some degree, demonstrated the sophistication of the money source and the equivalent speed at which it could come on and off the platform. Right. And on one end is retail capital, which is extremely sticky. And on the other end is professional institutional capital, which will move in and move out quickly. And while it's very tempting and easy to get institutional capital on the platforms today, if that's all you have and your credit model wavers on you or there's some dislocation in the market, that money's going to dry up very quickly. Right. And that's really going to hurt liquidity of the platform. That's why it's really important for the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think that's you can see the Lending Club and they talk about the importance of the retail investor, and it seems like it's not just lip service. They're really believing in in doing things to make it more of a level playing field. So it's not just all about originating for hedge funds. It's about originating for every class of investor, and they've made some real concrete changes in the last 6 to 9 months to make that better for sure. So then let's talk about Maxim 3, and you say formidable barriers, and this is something that's always been curious to me because we've had a sort of a duopoly here in this industry, in the consumer space anyway, for coming up on 7 years now. And it's always been curious that no one else has been able to gain traction. And you say in your white paper here that it's really difficult. So why is it really difficult for someone else to come up and really challenge Lending Club and prosper?
This is probably one of my favorite aspects about investing in Lending Club, and generally speaking as an investor in Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, I think it's generally thought of that there is no such thing as sustainable competitive advantage. People can build anything. And so what we often try to look for are other types of sustainable advantage. For example, one that people often cite are called network effects.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Facebook, the fact that you have 1 billion people on the platform means that everybody who comes on the platform generally knows other people on the platform. And therefore, why would they go somewhere else if the community online is the community that they want to hang out with? And WhatsApp built that network effect, and obviously they're an extremely valuable company. Snapchat has done it. And so we do look for network effects. So we're always in search of some sustainable advantage. Well, the cool thing about Lending Club is that there are actually some pretty formidable advantages, but I don't think the Silicon Valley investor community really understands that or ever kind of thought about it very deeply. And the opposite extreme I talk about is Groupon. Right? Groupon is a pretty straightforward business. Once people realized the power of the model, there was something in the neighborhood of 1,000 startups to replicate that model. Well, so people look at Prosper and Lending Club today, and they think that these companies are overnight successes. And we all know that they're
they've had a hard road.
And the benefit of having done that is that they've, one, built credit history, two, are on version 5, 6, 7, 8 of their credit models. Mm-hmm. 3, have navigated the regulatory environment, which is obviously not easy. And 4, solved the liquidity challenge of a two-sided marketplace and gotten to the point where, they're in reasonable balance. And those things are very difficult. And I think the average investor in Silicon Valley today who hears about a new peer-to-peer lending model generally says to themselves, wow, I was unaware of all this going on. I'm now aware of it. I understand the complexity of it, and I'm just too late. I've missed it. And I've had venture guys who I respect a lot say to me, hey, Charles, I credit to you because we, as a firm, completely missed it, and we're too late. And I am a little baffled by the last expression, and we're too late.
Yeah.
Because it isn't generally a winner-take-all market, consumer financial services. It's such a big market that you can have lots of winners. And I just smile and think to myself, I'm so glad that they think that they're too late.
Right. And
like, how beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, because that's, who knows? I mean, who knows in 10 years' time, looking out, I mean, it's obviously very possible that Lending Club will not be the number one company in this industry. There will be someone will come along who hasn't even started yet, potentially, and could displace them. We don't know, but it's interesting that people think that in such a tiny industry relative to the size of what it can be.
Right. I mean, Lending Club could be tremendously successful and be originating $75 billion, and you could have some other company who could be doing $150 billion.
Right.
And, it doesn't mean Lending Club wouldn't be wildly successful. They would be.
Sure.
But it's just such a big market. Yeah. And look, in China, you're seeing some pretty large, pretty dramatic growth in some companies. Yeah,
for sure. So your fourth maxim is built to last. And you talk about marketplace lenders should be built not just to disrupt, which we can all agree about the disruptive nature of what's happening here, but also to displace. So what do you mean by displace?
Yeah, by displace, that led to to me, an indicator that you've created an asset class. So I didn't want this to be viewed as like a feature or a function. Like, oh, there's a nice feature in the financial services space, a peer-to-peer loan. I wanted people to think of it as, oh, no, there's an entire asset class, and that if we effectively displace today's consumer lending business and market, you will see securitization, you'll see derivatives, you'll see new forms of distribution, you'll see more verticals open up. And to me, it needs to be a displacement, a permanent asset class development phenomenon, rather than a temporary, here's a gap in the market that we can take advantage of until the banks close it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Well, I know you got to get going, but I want to ask you one question before you leave.
Yep.
As you're looking at the industry now, and you look at banking, how do you think that banks are going to participate other than what they've already been doing? I mean, do you think that a lending club or a Prosper or something is going to be acquired by a bank one day? Is that, a lot of these banks have, they could easily afford to buy any of the companies in this industry. What do you think about a bank acquisition of one of these marketplace lenders?
I mean, I love what I'm about to say, which is I don't think it'll happen. And one of the biggest disappointments, I think, for a venture investor is that an acquirer comes in and takes a company out before it really achieves what it's possible of achieving to achieve. And I just think these companies are too disruptive, and the price that a bank would have to pay is so inconsistent with how banks trade today, and it would be so dilutive that a bank could just never stomach or get their head around the idea that this company, that came out of nowhere, would be able to command such a large market cap. It feels a little bit to me like, we're investors in Netflix, and it feels a little bit like the big media companies and the big studios looking at Netflix and thinking, some random new entrant, some small company, they're not, why would we take out some DVD, some company that mails around DVDs?
Right, for sure.
And then it becomes so big, now it's too big for anybody to take out.
Right. Okay. So on that note, do you see acquisitions coming from elsewhere, or do you think that it's these companies are going to be like Netflix and just develop on their own?
I think there will be roll up and combinations within the industry to achieve critical mass, but I don't believe that there will be any material acquisitions from outside the industry. So, for example, an eBay or an eBay, PayPal, they could buy somebody for $50 million or $75 million. Will PayPal buy somebody for $10 billion or Amazon or Google or a traditional finance company? I just don't think so.
Right. Okay. Well, interesting. That's I really appreciate you coming on the show, Charles. It's been a great conversation, and
of course,
Peter.
I
think I'll be very curious to watch how this unfolds. Over the next years.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a fun ride for all of us. I'm looking forward to it myself.
Thanks a lot, Charles.
Okay.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, there you have it. Fascinating conversation. I certainly learned a lot there. I hope you did too. Really interesting to get Charles' take on many of the different aspects of the industry, not least of which was that last point he made, that he doesn't think a bank is going to come in and acquire Lending Club or any of the other platforms anytime soon. So that will be very interesting to see if that actually does play out that way. So before I sign off, just one last request. If you haven't left a feedback for me, I would love you to leave some honest feedback, however you're listening to this, whether it's on iTunes or Stitcher. I'd love to hear feedback from listeners, good or bad. Always enjoy that. And if you want to leave a comment in the blog post that accompanies this podcast, that would also be very much appreciated. So on that note, I will sign off, and I will catch you next time. Thanks a lot.